Greetings and salutations to all of our fine podcast audience. Welcome to episode 146. And if you're a regular listener, you notice something's missing.
Nathan did not make it.
Nathan is not here. We're missing a chair. We're missing a voice.
And he always says, we made it, but we can't say we made it.
We didn't.
We made it.
He and I made it. Nathan is under the weather.
Yep.
Not feeling so
Not
good
feeling
today, which is our taping day.
But we're committed to turning out quality.
Oh,
yeah.
I don't know
We're
about
committed to turning out podcasts.
We're going to get a podcast done today.
Whether it's quality or not, we are putting it out.
Because we're committed to the weekly, right?
The weekly. That's
The
what
weekly.
we're committed to.
That's what we're committed to. And so we're going to keep the weekly. But we're not going to film too many without Nathan, I don't believe. Maybe 2. And then we're going to have him back.
Yeah.
Because we need him.
We need him back, you know.
We need
We need the furry.
Oh, that helps.
You have some.
I wouldn't call this fur.
I have 0.
I have stubble.
We need some. We need this.
Oh, we are like the degrees of that. You know, you're like a baby's butt.
I started out years ago, and I'm exactly like I was. You know,
Couldn't happen. Huh?
This is the way this face looked when I. Well, that's not true. This is the way my chin looked when I was.
And I tried to grow. I tried to grow as to see if I could do the beard like Nathan, and I can't pull it off. I'm way too thin. So this is good for me.
That's pretty dang
This
good.
is about all I can do.
I did 17
Nathan
days. I took a trip to Israel, and no one else was shaving, and so I didn't shave the whole time, 17 days, and I had some really long hairs, and then I had some really bare patches, and I go. Yeah, that's enough for me. I don't need to do any of that anymore. It was unattractive.
Nathan's going to be so glad he's not here to have the beard discussion.
No, that's right.
So, but that's what we talk about when he's not here.
Yeah.
So today, and if it's your first time, any of you made it this far.
Exactly.
I'm Jason. This is Ed and Nathan. We are all part of the teaching team here at Community Christian. We have these discussions every week, mainly answering your questions about things about our world and the Bible and stuff like that to try and help us think and respond to our world in a Jesus-centered way. And today, we've got a watcher of our podcast.
We don't know.
One of the two, I don't know.
One of the two.
But they have a question about the current series that we are in.
So it's a Community Christian attender.
It is. They've been with us for a while, or they're watching online. We've
True.
been in this series for several weeks now on the book of Ephesians. And we're wrapping it up 1st of December? Something like that?
Uh-huh.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So when this episode drops, we still got about a month to go. So this is right in the middle of it.
Right.
But here's their question, and I get where this question is coming from because this is something that we've mentioned several times throughout the series, several messages in the Ephesians series. And here's their question. I love the Ephesians series that you've been doing on Sundays. And we say thank you for loving it. Mm-hmm. We're glad you like it. Here's the question. Can you please help me understand what you're talking about when you say we are chosen? Everyone's chosen by God, right? But if I think about someone hearing these messages for the very first time, I'm afraid it would be confusing and maybe even insulting for them to hear this idea.
I can see where they're coming from.
I definitely can see where they're coming from.
Particularly if that's the only thing they hear, which so often people do, and they're often... Again, it's as if Ephesians has to stand on its own and you don't know anything else, which I think is a bad... I mean, we say all the time, we take the Bible podcast thing, saying the Bible is a unified story that leads to Jesus. And so I think there are a number of ways to think about that chosen thing. Mm-hmm. So, the original promise in the Old Testament,
Israel,
and there's
the chosen people.
There's a chosen people. I think there's definitely echoes of that in Paul's writing because he's going to talk about, in this church, there are Gentile people who were not a part of that chosen, and there's Jewish people, and a big part of what he's doing is letting them know, hey, we're all in that original promise. God has this original promise.
Well, and when you think about the context, like you just said, of how he's speaking, he is speaking to the Israelite people who have identified themselves as chosen for all these years, generations even. And so now you've got the kingdom has opened wide, and now all the world is being brought in to the new covenant relationship that God established through Jesus. And I think what Paul's doing there is he's using that language to be inclusive, like you just said, to let the Gentiles now know, no, I get that you felt like you weren't chosen for all this time, but Jesus has brought a brand new thing.
Right.
And now you are.
Yeah, and it again, when you talk about, I could see people being insulted that, you have to understand, I think that the Gentiles probably were insulted by when, if you were, so you have this one little group of people and they keep saying they're the chosen of God. Everybody else who had their own ideas about God, they were openly insulted and hated this little group of people. And it turned out the Israelites were right. But the Israelites got it wrong in that they felt like chosen was something to be held on to, and they didn't realize they were chosen for a purpose, which was to open the way for everybody else. And at that point, if people would have gotten the whole story, maybe it wouldn't have been as insulting.
So the misinterpretation of that idea of being chosen came through them misunderstanding what they were chosen for. Because I was thinking as you were talking, even in the Old Testament times, the Jewish people had a way for you to come in.
Oh, yeah.
To become a covenant person. I mean, a lot of people don't know this, but you could still become a part of the Jewish nation, but you had to go through some stuff.
You had to do some things.
You didn't get it by birth. You had some rituals you had to go through, and for the fellas, it was a little surgery.
Yeah, that's right.
So that was tough, and so even then, in that. What they would probably have seen as an accommodation. We are for the world, but at the same time,
not really.
Not really. You still are different. But I think the point of what Paul is doing here is he's saying, look, by means of what Jesus has done, none of that's, because he even goes that far at some point, doesn't do it in Ephesians, but certainly you read Galatians, and he goes, man, that circumcision thing don't mean nothing.
Right, that's right.
There is no good, there is nothing in that anymore. And in fact, he calls the Jewish people out and says, you were circumcised on your bodies, but not in your heart.
Not in your heart.
That was something else. And so he just sort of wipes all that clean, and that's where he says, there is no Jew, there is no Greek, and he goes through and he wipes he kind of levels the playing field in that.
And I think there's a tendency in all of us on both sides of that. So if I'm on the inside group, whatever that group is, there's a tendency to forget that. So Israel's not chosen because they're better than the other countries. They're not chosen for any other reason. I think I said this in a message.
Yeah.
God's not choosing people because they are good.
Yep.
It's because God is good.
Yeah. And
God's making a way for everybody, like the person said, to be a part of the chosen. And it's not like it's difficult. It's not like you can all be a part of God's chosen, but it is a particular way. There is a way to do it, and there was in the Old Testament. When you're on that inside part, there is a part to forget everything other than God chose me, and to elevate yourself a little bit. You watch this happen with Christians. I'm a follower of Jesus, and there's a tendency to get a little better than attitude.
Oh, definitely.
And to lose your humility about I was not the initiator of this, nor was I the one that did the major work in any of this. God did the choosing, and I'm blessed to be a part of it. Now I have a responsibility. On the outside, when you're not a part of the chosen, there is a tendency for all of us to get up in our feelings. And to feel like, well, why choose them? Well, the why is because God's just choosing. He's choosing. He's making a way, and he was always going to have to make a way.
Yeah.
There was going to be a way. And so we have to, on both sides, humility is required to be a part of the chosen, but to do the job of the chosen correctly, I should say.
You bring up a good point that I just hadn't thought of until we got into this discussion, is what that looks like, because I think the person who asked the question brings up a good point of how often when we do get away from that humility and that understanding of, I didn't do this, I was brought in, I was loved by God first, he loved me first before I ever loved him.
Right.
And I get that backwards. It does become sort of a prideful thing that then communicates to the outside world there is something inherently better about me.
Mhm.
And I think that's what we're seeing in our culture a lot these days. I see a lot of Christians who have this idea that, the goal of being one of the chosen of God is to then impose everything that I am and all that I believe on everybody else,
Right.
whether they like it or not. And so because I have a one up on you, and,
Right.
and you need to, it is a very, I think, upside down way of the way Jesus influenced us
Right.
to interact with the world and to interact with people. Certainly not the way he did.
Well, and it's almost, and really, I didn't think of this much until you were just talking about it.
Mhm.
When we go about imposing, so I'm a part of this group, and I'm going to impose what I know to be what God wants on people who have not yet decided they want to be a part of this.
Mhm.
I'm imposing. It's almost like we're saying to people, here's how you get in by doing these things, and I'm going to mandate that you have to do these things because you not doing them is somehow keeping God from blessing all of us,
And that's
and
so
it's
wrong.
willfully forgetting I got blessed because of nothing.
Before I ever did anything.
I didn't do anything.
Yeah.
And you could get blessed the same way. I'm to hold the standard because I'm on the inside. The illustration I think you and I both have used before is my HOA rules only apply to my neighborhood.
Yep.
And for me to drive over to your neighborhood and say, hey, we only can have Bermuda grass.
Mhm.
And your
Yeah.
grass is offensive to me.
Yeah.
Well, I'm in your neighborhood, man. You ain't agreed to my rules.
No. It's like I think I heard it from Andy Stanley. He used the illustration like you just did he said, we all have family rules.
Right.
He said, I have a bedtime for my kids, and I have rules that my kids are going to follow and everything. He said, one thing I've never done is I have never set a bedtime for your kids because you're not in my family. And the great part of that, I love that illustration, and the one you just mentioned is as well, is, my kids that follow my rules in my house, they are not my kids because they follow my rules.
That's right.
They didn't gain that status by virtue of following my rules. They became a part of my family first, and then as a outpouring of here's what we do as a family.
Right.
They now, because of the love given and shown and received from my kids, now we have this set of a way of life because this is what we do.
That's right.
Same thing with the way we interact with people who have not chosen to be a part of the family of God. They, for whatever reason, have said, not for me. Well, who am I to then go and impose my way of life on them?
Right.
Until they decide, you know what, I received the love of God.
That's
and
right.
now I've been grafted in, and so now
somebody then shows me the way.
Yeah.
It really then becomes the way. I've been at this longer than you. I'm so thankful to have you a part of the family now.
Mm-hmm.
Let me show you the way. And it's not, this didn't get you into the family. You are in the family.
Mm-hmm.
Let me show you the way.
Yeah.
And so I do think and you're right, this is our culture. Everybody's breaking up in these little tribes and wanting to impose their tribe on the other tribe. And Christians have been doing that for a long time. And on both sides of that, people get in their feelings.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, and I don't want to say I certainly don't want to say I agree with that way, but I understand where it comes from.
Oh yeah.
Because when you live a certain way and you follow a certain code or whatever you want to call it, and you've become convinced it is the best way to live, which we say this on Sundays in our services. We say believe we have found the most satisfying, fulfilling way to live, and it is the way of Jesus. So we believe that wholeheartedly. And I think sometimes people take that another step forward and go, well, if that's the best way to live, then we ought to make the world live that way.
Right.
And I can see where their motivation might be for that. But then what we have to then do is go back and go, well, is that the way Jesus did it?
That's right.
Because we are Jesus' people. And so he came into a world that certainly did not look favorably upon his way of doing life. And what did he do? Did he raise an army, take up the sword, impose it on the government? No, he laid his life down and actually became a victim
That's right.
of their system in order to show them his way of life and then to love them into the kingdom. And unfortunately, I see the church in a lot of places in America getting that a little twisted.
Yeah.
And again, I said it earlier, I get their motivation. And I think it probably comes from a good place for most people. I just think it misses the heart of Jesus.
Yep, that's right. It's not only that we do what Jesus says, if you do what Jesus says, but you don't do it in the spirit and way of Jesus, you're wrong. You're wrong.
Yeah.
Now, if you do it in the spirit and way of Jesus, but you don't do what Jesus says, you're also wrong.
You're also wrong.
It is a two thing. I do what he says the way he said.
Mm.
And admittedly, that's really, really hard because it always winds up with, I'm giving up my rights for the sake of others because that was his way.
And that certainly is not, and you mentioned this in your message just recently, of the American way of independence and self-sufficiency. Right. And I cling to my rights, my independence, my way of life. That certainly flies in the face of those set of American values that we have.
Which also, that's why this is really hard, I think. This idea of chosen and not chosen is hard for Americans because it feels, when you first hear it, it feels unfair.
Yeah. Well,
and so then our opening is, well, isn't everybody chosen? Well, yes, we've said this before, and I'm not sure I'd have said this 15 years ago, but I do believe it's the truth now that when Jesus died on the cross, he really did die for the sins of all people.
Yes.
And so God no longer deals with people according to their sins. It's much like I try to explain to people the difference between forgiveness between me and if Jason and I got wrong with each other, which thankfully we're not. We've been in a relationship a long time and we're clean with each other.
Yep.
But if we got wrong, I could forgive Jason of what he did without him ever asking me for it, repenting of what he had done. And that's what Jesus, in effect, has done on the cross. He paid the price. He ransomed us. Whatever illustration out of the Bible you want to use to describe it, on the cross, he did whatever was required to make a way for everybody with God. But reconciliation, or being a part of the chosen of God, requires that Jason, in our relationship, would be say, hey, Ed, I know what we did. I own my part. I want to be right. And so everybody doesn't wind up in the chosen, not because God hasn't done his part to open the way.
That's right.
But because everyone hasn't decided they want it.
Everything that stands between you and God has been accomplished.
Yes.
The reconciliation is now offered.
Yep.
And which is why Paul says that's our ministry.
Our job is to be the ministers of reconciliation.
That's right. And say, be reconciled to God now because forgiveness is offered. It's yours. It's been done. Now you can be reconciled to God.
Yeah, to me, it's such a better, once I finally understood it, it really does become good news. I used to go out and say to people, hey, here's the good news. You're a horrible person.
Yeah.
And Jesus decided he would love you anyway.
If
you know, and now the message really is God did everything. It had God, because he's so good, made a way for every person. And what he says to you is, hey, be reconciled.
Yeah.
And what you need to do is just agree with that
God.
God's done everything he can, and take the steps, put your faith in him, trust him, become a part of his family through baptism, follow along with the community, do that, walk in his way. And you're in the chosen. That's what it looks like.
But that requires a great deal of humility.
It does.
Which a lot of us are not.
Yeah.
And still hold on to letting go quite often. The pride that keeps us from doing that.
So, in all kinds of ways. Once we're inside, everything that holds us back from being what God wants us to be, and for me, I should just say, inevitably comes down to it strikes something at my pride.
Yeah. So for whoever asked this question, I hope that helps to take maybe, it sounded like maybe you were hearing a little edge in what we were saying in the series.
Or somebody you know
Or somebody.
might hear,
That's right.
feel a little edge.
And so I hope that maybe takes off a little bit. If you need more explanation or if that didn't do it, let us know. Write us back. We'll do a good job of hopefully clarifying it for you if we can. In fact, I will say in about a couple of weeks, we have somebody who asked some follow-up questions from a previous episode.
Okay.
They need us to clarify some stuff. So we're going to do that. I'm going to wait till Nathan comes back for us to do that.
Yeah, because it might have to do with the patient ferment of the ancient church. And
that's for our longtime listeners.
He's the only one that's read that book.
Yes. We did have an absence of scholarly work in our discussion today, which is Nathan's absence.
Yes.
So anyway, next week we have a question on tap that Ed and I are going to go ahead and answer before we have Nathan return. Somebody wants to know about how the whole thing with the rapture works.
Yeah.
So I've had that question quite a bit.
Oh, yeah.
So we're going to get into that next
All
week.
right.
So y'all come back. We will deal with that question. So until then, Nathan, get well.
Yep.
And
We missed you.
That's right. Y'all have a great week.
Bye.